Hey everybody, TCG Productions here, and it has been a very long time since I have recorded a video, not let alone uploaded and published and edited, and anyways, that's a story of its own. Anyways, first new video in quite a while, and today we are going to be taking a detailed overview of a system that I acquired not pretty recently, but fairly recently I should say. And brought it back to operating condition and whatnot. The system in question, a Gateway 2000 8046DX2 system with a processor internally clocked at 50 megahertz. So that means an external clock rate of 25 megahertz, given that it is a DX2 processor, which indicates clock doubling. Anyways, so if we go ahead and set the camera up, this requires a couple of slide adjustments. So anyways, we go ahead and set up our camera here and have a look at this system. You can tell right off the bat that this thing is tall. This thing is very, very tall. I'm willing to bet that this thing is probably somewhere in the realm of 2.5 to 3 feet tall. You know what, let's measure that. Let's see, we'll measure from the bottom here, 25.5 odd inches. Yeah, this is definitely one of the tallest, if not the tallest computer that I own. The next one behind it would be my main workstation system, and that clocks in somewhere around the 18, the 1.5 to 2 foot mark. And I think it's even taller than the Athlon 64 system that's behind the camera. The two don't even come close. The Athlon 64 system is 17 inches tall. So, and just so that way you can really get a feel for exactly how tall this mammoth beast of a computer is. On this table, it's above shoulder height. In fact, yeah, on this table, this system is literally above shoulder height. Now, for reference, table stands, let's see here, caught 29.5 inches off the ground. So yeah, we're dealing with a total combined height of somewhere around the 5 foot mark. So this system, I acquired this system from the college that I'm attending. And the reason the way I originally discovered this system is I was checking to see how much toner and copy paper and what type of toner, drum unit, and printers there were in several classrooms in a building, and this system was in one of the rooms, positioned beside a couple of filing cabinets in kind of an odd dark corner of the room. And the way you see it now is it's pretty close to how this system looked when I found it sitting in the corner. Basically, almost in the corner beside a couple of filing cabinets. Now, I have not cleaned up the case or anything, because it's been stored indoors in a climate-controlled environment all this time. So the only things that I've changed about the front is this 5.25 inch floppy drive was not here, and this 3.5 inch floppy drive was down here, and had a slightly wider floppy drive in place. But other than that, that's it. So yeah, as I said, this is definitely an older system. Gateway 2000 46DX2/50. And yes, we are talking about that Gateway 2000. The same Gateway 2000 that rebranded it as plain old Gateway in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, but yeah, this system is incredibly tall. So let me go ahead and spin this thing around, so that way we can have a look at the back side and kind of get an overview of the ports and whatnot that are on here. Now if you hear a jingling noise, that's one of the system keys. Yes, this system still has both of the keys that shipped with it from the factory. How it still has those keys nearly 30 years after it was built, I have no idea. But yet they somehow have managed to survive to this very day. Probably because of the fact that they were hanging out somewhere in the computer case and it just fell out of the computer case onto the workbench one day whenever I think I was taking one of the, one of the floppy drives out of the system, and suddenly I see this thing fall out and it's the system keys. So, and if you're wondering where the system keys are, I actually have them zip tied to the computer case. Well, one of them. The other one is on my personal keychain. So, we're going to go ahead and do a top-down view here, starting with the power supply. So the power supply, of course, is definitely not auto-ranging. Auto-ranging was still quite a number of years off for consumer power supplies. As we can see, if the camera would cooperate, this power supply can run on both 110 and 220 volt power systems. And of course, with this being North America, we use the 110 volt power system. Well, nominally, our line voltage is nominally 120 volts, but it tends to float a little bit high since we're directly off of a three-phase main feeder. So anyways, we have a bit of a funky looking IEC C13 socket going on there next to our voltage selector switch, and also close to our output label. And as we can see, that output label indicates that on a 110, 120 volt system we can pull 1.5 amps worth of power through that socket, and on a 220, 240 volt system we're limited to 1 amp of power on that socket. Now, you want to know what that socket's for? That is a female IEC C13 socket, and what you would do is you would plug a cable into that socket, and it would have a standard IEC C13 end on it that would plug in to a socket like that. That is our main power inlet. And next to that is the power supply fan, featuring a Panasonic Panaflow fan that has managed to remain quiet and trouble-free after nearly 30 years of operation and close to 20 years of storage. Above that is a label signifying FCC Part 15 compliance and an FCC ID. I will momentarily leave the camera zoomed in right here. Some of you can attempt to read that. It looks like N is a Nancy, W, I'm not sure if that's a W or an M as in Michael. Let's see. Let me see. On the camera, I'm reading it as a W. On the computer case, I'm reading it as a W. Okay. So N as in Nancy, W, Y, M as in Michael, G486, P24T, in case you wish to look that up. Now I don't know if you can still look up FCC IDs, because I tried a little while ago and I got nowhere fast with it. Then again, the FCC ID that I was looking up may very well have been faked. So down here we now see the system serial number tag with a couple of more logos on it indicating Underwriters Laboratories and CSA compliance. And if that serial number is exactly what I think it is, that says that this system was built on June 13th, 1993. And so far, everything that I have seen within the computer case, other than expansion cards of course, have pinned this system down to have pinned that serial number down to be quite well valid, as indicating the production date of June 13th, 1993, and then there is a trailing 9 at the end of that. I'm not sure if that's a production line or a shift ID, or even if this was the 9th system to be built that day. There are multiple possibilities available, that's for sure. And then beneath that we have the gateway. We have the kind of a product information tag. Gateway 2000 model number tower. Not really a model number, but okay. Next we have our input specifications, 110, 120 volts AC or 220, 240 volts AC at 50 or 60 cycles per second. And if that, let me see, either 4 amps on 110, 120 volts or 3 amps on 220, 240 volts. It says also classified by Underwriters Laboratories Incorporated in accordance with IEC publication 950. UL listed as a computer with a UL listing ID of 8L82. 8L82. So, moving down beyond that, we have quite a selection of port knockouts for various things. And let me see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 knockouts wide enough to accommodate various 25 pin connectors, whether it be 25 pin serial, parallel, or even SCSI. Because I've heard about Gateway 2000 manufacturing servers, and I genuinely would not be surprised if this was one of those rare beasts. Because I have seen plenty of the little desktop form factor systems that sits beneath your monitor and desk, and I've also seen these systems in much more economical looking, much more economical tower formats. Not this 2-foot tall beast of a computer. We also get 3 knockouts for various 9-pin connectors, more than likely serial. And so, yeah. Now, if we zoom in down here, we have an onboard game port and a COM2 port. Yes, that is a 25-pin serial port, and it can be adapted into a regular 9-pin serial port with a simple passive adapter, such as this one, if the camera would ever hope to focus on it, and I don't think that's going to happen. But it's pretty easy. We have a male connector on the 25-pin serial end. Our 25-pin adapter has a female connector, and it just simply plugs in like this. So, you just simply tighten the thumb screws down, and then you have a regular 9-pin serial port on the other side of this adapter, which you can then connect any regular serial cable to, whether it be straight through or no modem. More on that in a little bit. And then we of course have the game port connector, which can be used for connecting things such as joystick controllers, MIDI devices, etc., etc. Given how, now that particular game port is connected directly to the motherboard, and so that's probably intended for use with simply a game controller of some kind, such as a Microsoft Sidewinder or variant of. And of course, the COM2 port is also connected directly to system hardware. Now beneath that we have a 5-pin 180 degree DIN AT keyboard connector, and to use this with most PS2 keyboards, all you need is another passive adapter such as this one. On the end we have a 5-pin 180 degree DIN male DIN connector, and on the other end we have a 6-pin some kind of a 6-pin DIN connector. It's colloquially known as a PS2 connector. But it does have a pretty precise, it does have an accurate specification. I think it's a 6-pin, 270 something degree DIN connector. I don't know, sounds close enough. But basically you just plug your keyboard into that, plug that into the computer, and you can use it like any other regular keyboard. Now, with this system being old enough, there's not a PS2 mouse port, because it was still a number of years before that became common on everyday computers. Now, IBM's PS2 lineup had had it for a number of years by that point, but it still hadn't spread to be as common as it was in the late 90s throughout the 2000s, and you can still buy brand new motherboards with PS2 keyboard and mouse connectors on them to this very day. Now, if we go and move on beneath that, we have our various various expansion cards. Starting at the top, we have a pretty general purpose multifunction I/O card right there. We have a 25-pin parallel port as LPT1, excuse me. Then we have a 9-pin serial port as COM1. This card is also where COM2 and the game port are connected. And the card also provides a 34-pin floppy controller and a standard 40-pin IDE controller. The card only has one IDE channel, but you can definitely use two devices on said channel. And in fact, there are two devices on the singular IDE channel on that card. Then we have an ATI. I think it's an ATI Mach 64, I believe. Yeah, I think it's an ATI Mach 64 of some description with a megabyte of video memory, standard 15-pin VGA output. It's a bog standard, no frills, decently fast VGA card for the time. Beneath this, we have a Sound Blaster Vibra 16X CT4170, if you're quite curious. We have another 15-pin game port, which is where you would optimally connect a MIDI device, since we do have two game ports available to us on the system. Then we have line out, line in, and microphone inputs. And beneath that we have a UMC Ethernet card of some description. I forget what the model number is, but it's only a basic 10 megabit Ethernet card with RJ45 for 10 base T and a BNC connector for 10 base 5 Ethernet connectivity. And of course we have our standard link and activity lights. So, let's see, I did unplug my adapter. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to pop the cover on. Well, we're not exactly going to pop the cover yet. We're going to swing it back around one more time and have a look at some of the front panel devices and kind of do some explaining on that. So we're going to start out way up here at the top of the system where we have our various indicator lights, a key lock of some description, reset and turbo switches, and the power switch. Now we're going to start off with the basic stuff. Power switch. Given how this is an AT system, this is a hard power switch that hard switches AC line power to the system's power supply. So, and then we have a green power LED up here to indicate the system power status. That's connected. In fact, all of these indicator lights are directly connected to the motherboard. Then we have our hard disk activity indicator light, which I just said that all of these are connected directly to the motherboard. Actually, no. The hard disk activity indicator light is connected to a set of pins on the multifunction I/O card. And then we have our turbo LED that's connected directly to the motherboard. And it's also in some form controlled by the turbo switch on the front of the system. And Gateway 2000 was pretty sensible whenever they set this up. Pressing the turbo switch in enables turbo mode. Unpressing it disables turbo mode. Now this only works if you have the CPU speed in the system BIOS set to slow. If you have it set to fast, turbo mode is always on regardless of the state of this switch. Now, Control Alt and keypad plus and minus, well, numpad plus and minus do serve to enable or disable turbo mode, overriding not only the state of the button but your BIOS settings. And then we have a reset switch here. It is just a momentary push button switch, and it does exactly what you would expect it to do, resets the system. And then we have a key lock right here. This is a keyboard lockout. This is basically a keyboard lockout. So you take your key, you put it in there, you turn it to the lock position, it disables the keyboard. Now this only offers a pretty remedial level of security. It keeps honest people honest, because you can just as easily unplug that connector from the motherboard and if you unplug the connector from the motherboard, that's basically all it takes to bypassing this keyboard lockout switch. And there's also 4 pins on the back of this. One set of pins is for normally open, the other set of pins is for normally closed. So right now as it's configured, the set of pins that is normally actually scratch that entire thing. So to bypass this lock, basically you reverse the pins, take them off of the normally closed pins and connect them to the normally open pins, or vice versa, from normally open to normally closed, because right now this switch is in its normal state. So the normally closed pins are closed, like bridged across, and the normally open pins are open. They're not bridged. So whenever you put this switch into the non-normal position, the lock position, the closed pins become open and the open pins become closed. So all there is to it is just you're basically reversing the state of the switch. And given how you're not locking the keyboard, given how the keyboard lockout switch doesn't work whenever you unplug the connector from the motherboard, it's probably a normally open switch. The pins are set up for normally open, so you could easily just unplug it from the motherboard or switch the pins to the normally closed position, which is open when this switch is locked. Then we should probably pan the camera down so you can see what I'm going to be talking about. Then we have our front panel expansion devices. So we have a 5 1/4 inch floppy diskette drive, double-sided, double density, 1.44 megabytes. Nothing, it's a no-frills part. Then we have a 5 1/4 inch, 1.2 megabyte high density floppy diskette drive with a locking latch. It's black. It does not match the rest of the computer, but it was the cheapest thing that I could find on eBay that looked like it worked, because 5 1/4 inch floppy drive prices on eBay have gotten absolutely completely out of hand insane. And then beneath that we have the last front panel expansion device, a compact disc reader. Now, oddly enough, there's a volume control on the front of the drive, there's headphones, but there's no play pause forward, backwards buttons. Kind of odd, but okay. And then of course we have our activity LED for the drive, and our eject button, and we have a little pinhole over here for an emergency eject, and you put a paper clip in there and it manually actuates the drive's ejection mechanism. Really odd way to, that was a really odd emphasis, you know that? But anyways, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and pop the cover off the system while explaining, well, I was going to explain something, but now my mind has gone totally blank. Either that or I've already explained it at some point while recording the video. Actually, I just found out what I just remembered what I was going to explain. One of the instructors that I'm friends with at the college, he purchased this system sometime in 1993, and he commissioned it, I think, sometime around September of 1993, and he used this system for his business up until late 1999 and early 2000 or early 2000, whenever the system was retired. So as you can see, I have basically taken the case off the computer. Now I'm going to go ahead and move this over to the side, and we will get a much closer and in-depth look at the hardware that this system contains. So, we start out at the very bottom of the system here. In fact, I'll actually need to drop my tripod lift down more than a little bit. So we start out here at the very bottom of the system. We have a Micronix. We have a Micronix motherboard. Let's see. I forget exactly what the model number is, but we have a Micronix 8046 motherboard here, and the 8046 processor is that purplish ceramic chip with the heatsink permanently bonded to it. Now, you see the socket next to it? That is not a typical processor upgrade socket. That is actually for a Waytech coprocessor. And that is WEITEK. I'm not exactly sure how they intended for that to be pronounced, so I might be slightly butchering it, but Waytech sounds pretty appropriate. So beneath our, now another thing I almost forgot to explain is the 8046 processor is socketed, so that means that you can upgrade it. Now, I'm not sure if you just simply pull the processor out of the socket or what, but I know it's socketed, so it should be removable, but I haven't been able to figure out how to safely remove it without endangering it or the motherboard in the process. So, not gonna. Now, above that, we have actual real cache. Now, technically it's pronounced cache, but I prefer calling it cache because there's absolutely no way that you can get cache and cash, as in the cold hard cash you hand to the gas station attendant, mix up. And so that's, yeah, this is actual real working level 2 cache for the processor. Now, how much cache is that? I'm not sure. Let me see, MT5C6408 at 20 nanoseconds because of the dash 20. Let me see, 64, probably 64 kilobytes. And we have 8, so let me see, 64, 128. Let me see, bottom row is 128. Double that for the bottom half, it's 256. That's 512K of L2 cache on the motherboard. I believe that's L2. If that is 512K of L2 on the motherboard, that is insane for 1993. And you know, whenever the person that originally owned this system spec'd it out, he pulled out all the stops. So this thing was fully maxed out. This thing was fully loaded. And so beneath all of that, we have a few things going on here. We have this kind of whitish beigeish piece. This is not only a guide for very long ISA expansion cards. If I go ahead and unclip this, our system speaker is actually held by that, and it can be. There's a couple of different places that I could have connected it. I can connect it directly to the system, to the motherboard, or I can connect it to a set of pins on the Sound Blaster card that is labeled PC speaker. I prefer to connect it directly to the motherboard, so that way if something goes wrong, I know that I'm going to get beeps from the motherboard. I'm not sure what the Sound Blaster can do that the motherboard can't. Haven't really looked into it, not really bothered to. Then we have our RAM here. This is we have 8 megabytes of RAM here. We have 2 banks of 4 megabytes, and each slot has 1 megabyte of RAM installed. And then beneath that we have a proprietary 32-bit memory expansion slot for the Micronix, either the Micronix M800 or the Micronix M810 memory expansion cards, and that would be one of those really rare cards. Well, it's a rare card, all right, that's for sure. It would fill the entire bottom of this case, which would negate the use of our 8th ISA slot on the very bottom, and it would actually take advantage of this guide in our plastic, I call it a plastic guide and speaker holder, basically. However, that Micronix memory expansion card is extraordinarily rare, and it contains banks 3 and 4. It contains memory banks 3 and 4. Now, this motherboard will support up to 64 megabytes of installed memory, which 64 megabytes of installed memory was quite the deal for 1993, and that's another reason why I suspect that this may have been one of those heavy-duty server-grade Gateway 2000 systems, because you can, in 64 megabytes in 1993, you were either running some kind of heavy-duty server software on this computer, or you were probably running Novell NetWare. So, and I did mention 8 ISA slots. This is a straight ISA computer. It is not ISA VESA local bus. It is not mixed ISA and PCI. It is straight 16-bit ISA. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a variant of this motherboard that sacrificed that memory expansion slot for a single ISA VESA local bus slot, but I have not seen or heard of a system with that configuration. And let me see. The system does have 8 ISA slots in it. However, we can only use 7 of them. Well, optimally, we can only use 7 of them, because the ISA video card, the ATI card, it likes to steal the IRQ of the expansion slot directly beneath it. So as we can see, we have our multifunction I/O card, we have our video card, and then way up in there, if it survives a YouTube encoding and compression process, is ISA slot number 3, which is empty. Beneath that we have the Creative Vibra 16, and beneath that we have the network card. And I was having problems where the network card and the sound card would not reliably detect. And it actually got to the point where neither card was being detected, despite the absence of one or the other. So, I did some Googling and I found some obscure thread on an internet forum that said to avoid the ISA slot directly beneath the graphics card, because the graphics card kind of tends to steal the IRQ of the slot beneath it. So I moved the Sound Blaster card down and the network card down, and just like that, both of them were immediately, automatically detected and configured. Now, as we'll learn later in this video, this system does not have any what's the word I'm looking for? This system does not have any concept of ISA plug and play, which is really more like ISA plug and pray. Because the original premise is you plug the card into the system, that's the plug aspect of it, and then the card plays nice with the system when you power it on. And either the BIOS will initialize the card under its own plug-and-play extensions, or you have a third-party plug-and-play device driver, such as such as a product from Intel that I'll demonstrate later. I can't recall the name of it right now. But it was oftentimes referred to as ISA plug and pray, because if you had plenty of ISA, if you had quite the number of ISA plug and play cards installed in the system, you'd get conflicts, and eventually you would have to end up you would end up having to manually configure the card anyways. And whenever you got to that point, every time you modified your system configuration or added a new ISA plug and play card, you plug the card in and pray that it didn't conflict with anything else. Whether it be because the card's only configurable resources were already gobbled up by something else in the system, or from your plug and play manager just putting two cards into a conflicting configuration. So, now that we've discussed everything down there for now, we'll go ahead and move on to the upper half of the system. And we go ahead and we come right back to our 5 1/4" expansion devices. This right here, this is the CD-ROM drive. It works pretty well. And you might have noticed a gray cable sneaking its way in front of the 8046 processor and plugging into the Sound Blaster card. That is a CD audio cable. Systems this old have absolutely no concept of CD audio being routed over the IDE bus. Now, because of this, you had to have a direct audio connection between your optical drive and your sound card, or your optical drive and directly to your speakers if you plugged into the headphone port on the front of the optical drive. So the CD audio cable was a solution. CD audio cable hung on quite well until the early 2000s, I'd say early mid-2000s, whenever not only did audio routing over the system's IDE bus really take off, it took off and it worked well. Because the Athlon 64 system behind me, while it does support it, there's just not enough bandwidth for smooth playback of CDs over the system's data bus. So we're back a little bit later. Sun's gone down. It's only 7:40 p.m. though it feels like it should be closer to 9 just looking out the window. Anyways, what I had to do is I had to add a CD audio cable between the optical drive and the motherboard's built-in CD audio header, and then I had to configure Windows to use that header for CD audio rather than just trying to grab it over the system's IDE bus. I don't know why I said ISA. I've been dealing with old computers for far too long as of recently. But yeah, long story short, the gray audio cable is for CD audio. No gray audio cable, no CD audio through the sound card. Anyways, above that we have the 5 1/4" floppy diskette drive. As I said, it was the cheapest thing on eBay that looked like it worked, and it does work. However, at the moment, I don't believe I happen to have any 5 1/4" floppy diskettes that I could test it out with right now. It does work, and we'll get to hear it do its seek test. Now, the thing directly above it, that is the 3.5" floppy diskette drive and a 5 1/4" adapter tray. And the 5 1/4" floppy drive uses a 34-pin edge card connector, or card edge connector, and then the 3.5" floppy drive, it uses the standard 34-pin actual pin style connector, but the adapter tray that I have it in goes ahead and adapts it to a 34-pin card edge connector. And the floppy drive cable actually has it's actually set up so you can plug in either type of connector into the A and the B floppy drive positions. So I think that's pretty neat. So, and then just above that we have the hard drive cage, and let me tell you what, that hard drive cage is it's a bit of a trick getting anything in and out of there. Now notice how the hard drive cage is just as wide as the 5 1/4 inch front panel expansion bays. Well, oh, and it's also fairly tall too. Well, if you wanted to, you could put 2 3.5 inch hard drives in there, or if you so desired, you could get one of those big old honking SCSI drives that would easily take up 2 bays. That's what they call a full height drive, because it eats up 2 5 1/4 inch bays. You could get one of those massive drives, like a, I forget exactly, I know it's a Seagate, like a Seagate Elite 9 or something like that, and put it in there, and then you'd run your SCSI, cable down to your SCSI card, and this bay is set up such that you've got holes on the side to attach one of those massive SCSI drives, and you've also got holes on the bottom and the top of the drive cage to install a typical 3.5 inch IDE drive, or even 2 3.5 inch SCSI drives. However, I don't think that most SCSI drives of that era would have taken nicely to being run upside down. So yeah, that's just a general hardware overview, and there's a bit of a story behind the hard drive. Now, before we get to that, as I said earlier, getting the hard drive cage in and out of there is a bit of a trick, and I'm now going to demonstrate that trick. Basically, you have to take the power supply out of the system. Not completely out of the system, but you definitely have to get pretty intimate with it, that's for sure. So, we have to start out by disconnecting everything. So we'll disconnect our hard drive, both of our floppy drives, and our optical drive, and then I'll come down here and I'll go ahead and zoom out, and I'll go ahead and disconnect the motherboard power connectors. And there's a bit of an adage to these connectors, because these are both 6-pin power connectors, and the thing is with these, given how they're both 6 pins, it is possible to get these connectors switched. If you switch these connectors around, you will kill your motherboard graveyard dead. So the way I always remember it is, we've got black wires here, black wires here, black to black, you're going to be back. Now, sometimes it's red and white, sometimes it's red and red. So, red and white, what a fright, or red to red, motherboard dead. And they do not kid about that one bit, because a lot of the times on some motherboards that are actually grounded to the case, and the case is grounded to the ground pin in your IEC-C13 socket, and provided that everything else is hunky-dory, grounded to your house's electrical system's ground. In the case of that, if you switch those connectors, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up shorting out your power supply. Now, your power supply will respond in one of two ways. It will either, one, see that there's an actual short on there, and it'll just simply go into some sort of a shutdown mode, or 2, if it doesn't take so kindly to that, it's just going to sit there, continue running, and make smoke and flames and sparks and other not so great things happen to your motherboard. So yeah, don't get those switched, right? Now that we have the power supply completely unplugged from everything, and look at this wiring harness. You don't get much on these older supplies, do you? You get, let me see, you get 1, 2, 3, 4. You get 5 Molex connectors. You get 3 of those little 4-pin bird connectors. And then you get your motherboard power connectors. You don't get much on these old power supplies, I can tell you that. But once you have those out, what you do is you undo the 4 screws on the back of the power supply. And I'm not showing that because, well, there's not a whole lot worth seeing over there. And you'll notice that there is you can almost kind of see a little shelf right up in here that the power supply, it's currently not resting on it, but it will be once I get all 4 of these screws out of here. And you'll see that the power supply is now starting to drop down onto that little shelf. That out of there. Now the power supply is no longer screwed into the computer case, and it is now resting on that shelf. That's secured with another couple of screws. Without those screws there, this power supply would have just fallen down and probably damaged the computer. Probably destroyed a couple of expansion cards in the process. But the next great thing we do is I just take this power supply, run back here, and power supply slides out like that, and our wiring harness comes out with the power supply, and I can either set this on something off to the side, such as, oh, what better than another power supply, or I can go ahead and set it on top of the case. Now, there's 4 screws that are on top of the computer case that actually hold the hard drive cage into the system. And you might be able to see those screws. And the next thing we do is we simply undo the 4 screws. Now you might be a little bit confused as to why I'm having to take the power supply out to get the hard drive cage out. Well, you'll see in a moment, but I'll explain. There is some tabs that they're almost like flange tabs that stick out to the side that have screw holes in them that attach the hard drive cage to the computer case. Now, they extend past the screw holes, and because there's this lip that comes down, I can't just like slide it sideways and out of the system, because that would make too much sense. But what I can do instead is what I do instead is I take the hard drive cage and I slide it back, down, and out. And there we go. Now we can see that our hard drive is screwed in with 4 screws on the bottom. Now this hard drive cage can be installed in the computer either way. So on the bottom here, they give you plenty of provision. So on the bottom here, they give you provisions for that. We got screw holes here, here, and here. Now you might also use these bottom screw holes these bottom 2 in conjunction with these upper 4 if you're installing a particularly hefty or weighty SCSI hard drive. In which case, you probably also have screws on the side too. And if you've got all those screw holes available to you and you're dealing with a particularly chunky, SCSI hard drive, it would probably behoove you to go ahead and install all of those screws. So, now when it comes to removing the 5¼ inch front panel expansion devices, it's pretty simple. What you have to do is unplug it, and then you undo the screws that hold it in, sometimes dropping them in slightly amusing manners. And then all the devices just come right out of the front of the computer, as you'll see in just a moment. Now, one of these screws actually has the system's case grounding strap put through it, so that electrically grounds the case, because if this power switch or the power supply were to ever develop an electrical fault, it would end up grounding out through the computer case, and it would end up energizing the computer case. Now, if you don't have that ground strap connected to the, guess what? You're going to be in for quite the shocking experience next time you touch any metal part of the computer. And sometimes even your peripherals will be in for quite the shocking experience, as you might end up introducing a very nasty ground loop and making smoke come out of something expensive. So, and now I'm undoing this side's screws for the 5¼ inch floppy diskette drive. And now the optical drive. Then I've got a couple more connectors to unplug, and we can take quite a bit of the devices out of the system. So, floppy drive, squeak, slides right out. And then the 5¼ inch floppy drive, unplug it, and it too comes out as one big assembly just about the time that a wind gust hits and makes a house creak. So let's set this. Where's a good place to sit? Set it on top of the hard drive cage. And then the optical drive, it's a pretty similar story. Unplug the CD audio cable, unplug the IDE cable, and it comes right out of the system. In fact, this is probably the first time I've actually ever had the optical drive out of the system. So let's see, it is a Toshiba manufactured CD-ROM. It is a Toshiba manufactured CD-ROM drive, model number XM-6102B. And here's the Toshiba logo. And then we've got the typical Class 1 laser product warning, basically saying, don't open me. So, walk in front of the camera here, probably make the autofocus, probably drive the autofocus completely batty. Rearrange some things here, and now that we have all of that out, I can drop the camera down quite a significant amount. Tighten up that adjustment, and now we can zoom in and let's kind of clear away a bit of the cruft and clutter here. Unplug that. Unplug that. Put those somewhere else. Now we have a much better look at our multifunction I/O card and all of our expansion cards in general. Now I'm about to go ahead and start moving the system around, and I'm not too particularly interested in absolutely tearing up the power supply. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall it. And reinstalling it is pretty simple. I just slip the power supply's wiring harness back through, put it into its little holder, set the thing on its shelf, and then I can go ahead and reinstall the screws that hold the power supply in. There's one. It only takes one screw to get it up off that shelf, which makes me far less nervous that the whole thing's going to come crashing down. As they say, it only takes one match to light a forest fire. Just kind of snug these screws up. There we go. Doesn't have to be super tight. Just going to be taking it back out in a bit. So, next thing I'm going to do is I am going to put the system on its side so we can have a better look at some of the installed hardware. Zoom that out. Make sure that the coast is clear. And there we go, simple as that. So now I get to do this whole song and dance another few times. So let's go ahead and get a better shot at this. Pan the camera down at quite an extreme angle. Straighten things. You can kind of straighten things out here. Move power supply's wiring harness out of the way. So, what we're looking at now are the various expansion cards from a pretty steep angle. So, go ahead and get this CD audio cable out of the way. And so the card on the very top is the multifunction I/O card. As you can see, we've got a couple of ribbon cables going over to it. Hard drive's activity LED plugs into a set of pins. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug those three. And the ISA slots grab on the cards rather tightly. So actually getting them out of here without completely bending everything up or doing other creative tricks like that is going to be a little bit complex. And there's a bit of an order to how cards should be removed here. With the overall gist being you remove the tallest card first and work your way down from there. So tallest card first means that we are going to be removing the video card first. As soon as I can get all these screws out of here. So the reason I'm removing the video card first is I've got this big empty space right here above this surface mount IC, and I've got an empty slot beneath it, and it's also the tallest card in the system. So rock it back and forth. And it takes a little bit of persuasion for this to actually do what I want it to do, but it comes out with a little bit of noise. So let's see. But yeah, an ATI Mach 64 Ultra, an ISA. So here is our video card. We have a Foxconn branded VGA connector. We have missing pin. We have missing hardware on the board for I think S-Video out. Just going by the looks of it. Maybe composite and S-Video. Maybe some combination of the two. Who knows? Here we have our BIOS IC, and feeling that it's probably either read-only memory or electrically erasable, programmable read-only memory. Then we have a couple of clock crystals, two very large ICs, One of them is probably the 2D. One of them's probably the 2D controller, and the other one being the 3D controller, because I've heard that these cards have two completely separate memory subsystems, with this one over here being for the, let me see, 256, 512, 1024, 2048. Right, so it looks as if this card has 2 megabytes of onboard video for onboard RAM for the 3D subsystem, and just looking at these ICs here, I'm seeing 256, 8 nanos. Let me see, we have, let me see, that's the, of course the camera won't focus on it now. Yeah, it doesn't have a hope of focusing. So I'm seeing a -10 on the 3D video memory, so that'd be 10 nanosecond. I'm seeing a -8 on the this memory right here. So this is for the 2D video subsystem, 8 nanosecond timing. So very, very nice video card for 1992. I'm seeing a lot of production date codes of 1992 on there, so that would definitely pin it down for a 1993 system build. Next, I'll remove the multifunction I/O card, and getting anything out of slot 1 is the most difficult task with this system, especially when it's got lots of pins and things on it that like to cut and whatnot, which is not great. So let me see, UM82C862F multifunction I/O controller. So there it is. And then we've got a 34-pin floppy connector, 40-pin IDE connector. We've got a game port connector here. We've got our COM2 port connector right there, and then we have a set of configuration jumpers here and here, as Shango 066 likes to do. And we've got some miscellaneous supporting logic. We've got a single clock crystal, and then we've got our hard disk activity LED pins right there, and more supporting logic, and then our connectors. And you may have noticed this corrosion taking place up here. I rescued this card from a 286 system that had one of those Varda poison pills of doom that I clipped out not long after discovering it. Then we've got our Sound Blaster Vibra 16 card here. And this has quite a bit of empty room to just like grab onto, and that comes out just like that. And this is an ISA plug and play card, and I've probably already mentioned that before. This and the network card are ISA plug and play cards, so I need a plug and play configuration manager to be able to use these. So here we have the actual, we actually have the brains of the operation here, a Vibra 16XV, and then copyright Creative Technology Limited, 1997. And we have some kind of a code. Up here at the top, Sound Blaster model CT4170. We have an auxiliary input, we have our CD input, and then we have a telephone answering device header, and then we have a microphone header, that's that little 4-pin thing. We've got a motherboard audio header, which is, I believe that's where you would connect your front panel audio connectors if you had this in there instead of to the motherboard. But we don't have any front panel audio anything on this system, so it's not in use. Got a couple of configuration jumpers there, And then we've got our connectors here. And it is, just like the others, a full 16-bit ISA card. I'm willing to bet that this has probably been pulled out of a Dell system at some point, since we do have a DPN listed, 000054674. So, and then beneath that we have the network card. And the way I usually remove this network card is I take advantage of the BNC connector on the back of it. I use that to get myself a little bit of leverage while rocking the card back and forth, and it makes removal of it stupid easy. So this card is based around a UMC UM9008F controller IC, and we do have a socket for a boot ROM, which is empty. Now typically you'd probably put something in here. You'd probably put a boot ROM in here that enabled you to PXE boot off of a network device of some sorts. This card was manufactured in 1997 as well. You see, the PCB has a date code of 9619. The IC has a date code of 9647. Our impedance, or Ethernet impedance matching transformer has a date code of 9713. Our Ethernet, well, I don't know exactly what this is. I'd have to look it up. This is our Ethernet transformer. 9706 date code. This little supporting IC is 9652. Yes, that pins this card down to be a roughly 1997 build date. And it falls right in line with the Creative card in terms of capability and feature set. In terms of the basic configuration, it's ISA plug and play. So yeah. Now, I had a heck of a time trying to find drivers for this card, because this thing is like a clone of a clone card. It's a clone of a Kingston KNE 2000 TL. It's a clone of a Kingston KNE 2000 TLC, and that is in and of itself a clone of an NE 2000 card. So we're dealing with the clone of a clone card here. And the reason I could tell that it was a clone of a Kingston card is because where it looks like they've literally applied whiteout here, if I hold it, there we go, just the right angle, Kingston something division, and we've got tick boxes for KNE 2000 TLC, KNE 2000 LC, and then KNE 2002, either KNE 2002 LC or just KNE 2002L. So I tried looking up drivers for this card based on the KNE 2000 TLC. No, absolutely no luck. I tried looking up generic NE 2000 drivers. No luck. There was a sticker on this thing here that said NE 2000 compatible, but, you cannot use generic NE 2000 drivers with this card. You have to use the UMC drivers. So I had to peel that sticker off of there, thus destroying it, to expose the part number on this IC, a UM9008F. And then I was able to get the drivers and get this card initialized and working properly under MS-DOS and Windows for Workgroups 3.11. Yes, I have Windows for Workgroups 3.11 installed on here. Isn't that exciting? So I'm going to go ahead and plug our network card back in. This card is slightly too long for the slot. Either that or the motherboard line is a bit twat. I'm not going to fight that right now. But what I am going to do is I am going to remove at least some of the RAM. So if we come over here, we can very clearly see the installed system memory. So this system takes 30-pin SIMs. As you can see, this is a pretty archaic looking memory module, but it does work, and it's a 30-pin SIM with manufacturing date codes on the ICs of 9152, so very late 1991. And you see, I'm not seeing an obvious date code on the PCB itself. It's probably buried away beneath one of these ICs. And these are Gold Star modules. Before Gold Star purchased LG and it became known as Lucky Gold Star, these are Gold Star GMM791000NS-70. So these are 70 nanosecond modules. And there's 8 of these in here, and they are all 1 megabyte each. So slip this down in here. At least that's the overall idea. Provided that wiring isn't getting in the way. Oh, come on. This went back together a lot easier off camera. So, there we go. Slot that back into place and go ahead and seat it in. Now, you might have noticed the absence of a battery installed in the computer. Well, this system also had one of those Varda 3.6 volt poison pills of doom. And it too had, unfortunately, begun leaking into the computer. Now, it did not, the damage was certainly not fatal to the computer. In fact, it really didn't even affect it much other than just tarnishing a bunch of the contacts in the ISA slot, some of which are still pretty rough looking. The keyboard controller socket and whatnot is also pretty rough looking, but they work, and I'm not going to mess with the keyboard controller socket. So, there are some traces that have been burned through. They go to the battery, so I'm not particularly worried about it. Now, basically what I did, I clipped the battery out, and then I did a vinegar wash on the affected portions of the motherboard, followed that up with copious quantities of distilled water, and then I blew it out with the air compressor, and that so far has seemed to neutralize and stop the corrosion dead in its tracks. In fact, I should probably show you what that portion of the motherboard actually happens to look like. Now you can see the tarnished pins in the ISA slot there and there. You can see the battery is missing off of the motherboard. You can see the keyboard controller. So, yeah. Overall, I think I caught it just in time before it did anything too serious or quite possibly even fatal to the system. And then we have a couple of banks of dip switches right here to configure the various system options. I don't actually happen to have the manual for the motherboard on hand. However, I do have at least a couple of copies of it on my Windows 2000 system, the Windows 2000 side of the Athlon 64 computer. We do have a clock crystal right here on, let me see, 14.31818 megahertz. And that is probably for the, let's see, 14.31818. That is oddly specific, probably for the system's internal real-time clock. And then over here next to the chipset is another crystal operating at 50 megahertz. So it really makes me, that makes me wonder if externally the CPU is a 50 megahertz part, but it's internally clocked at 100 megahertz because of the, it's a DX2. I don't know. That is quite interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I just noticed that. Let me see. Let me see, 64, 28, 26, 512. You see, 512K of onboard L2 cache, and externally 50 megahertz, internally 100 megahertz, DX2, 8 megs of RAM, provisioning for a massive SCSI hard drive of some sorts. I tell you what, I think this may be one of those server class systems. But anyways, yeah, so let me tell you the story about the hard drive. This hard drive is a Seagate ST4766NV. It is a, let me see, 899 cylinders, 15 heads, 62 sectors, 512 kilobyte physical sector size, 420, not 512 kilobyte, 512 byte. 512 bytes of physical sector size, 428.1 megabytes total. So, this system has half-baked CHS translation, and to make a very long story short, anything above 528 megabytes, any hard drive above 528 megabytes in this system, absolutely flat out does not work. Period. So, and I could go into a whole tangent on that, but this video would very suddenly become much longer. So, let's have a look at our 5¼ inch floppy drive, since that's probably the most interesting of the expansion devices in the system. Go ahead and zoom this out quite a ways. So this is a Sankyo branded 5¼ inch floppy drive. Part number 148388-01, and then probably some kind of a serial number, and then a PCB YG-437F94V. So, yep, here we go. It's a white, it looks like it's a rebrand from YE Data, a YD-380B, manufactured August of 1987. Serial number of 1175-0576. And this is a pretty pristine, beautiful looking drive. Like, you can see shiny in the reflection of the sides. You can almost see the camera. So, you know, this drive is in good functioning condition. Here we can see the little latch mechanism that serves to basically latch a floppy diskette into the drive. And we've got a PCB up here with a bunch of configuration jumpers, dip switches, and all that kind of jazz. Lots of supporting logic, multiple controlling ICs and whatnot. Got a PCB down here and a PCB. Yeah, I got a PCB down here which connects the stepper motor, which connects the spindle motor to the rest of the drive. A little thing right here, fairly complex. And then this whole thing gets simplified down to a single circuit board and a 3½ inch floppy drive. But yeah, anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and grab myself some water or something, go ahead and get this system put back together, and we'll fire it up and have a look at the software side of things. And then we've got our Sound Blaster